We're joined for the Burning Platform, which is brought to you by Nando's every single week this morning, by a special guest who was also on my TV show not so long ago. His name is Solly Moeng. So we'll talk to him about what's going on. But before we do that, Solly, it's nice to see you, man. How are you?
Good to see you, Gareth. Lovely to be here this morning.
Thank you very much. So just in case people don't know your background, maybe you just give us a little crash course in Solly Moeng. And I'm sorry that it's taken us so long to have you on the show.
That's okay. You know, somebody with the hair color of my type has been, has a very long history. So I just say that ordinarily I specialize in brand reputation management,
right.
And I'm very much interested in destination reputation. That's why what happens to South Africa really irks me a lot of the times, because I think this is an amazing destination brand with much potential, but it's being led by the wrong people who are hating it all the time. That's why I'm so passionate about
it. So this is your own business that you're talking about?
Excuse me?
Your brand reputation business. It's your own business?
It's my own business, yeah. I run Don Valley Reputation Managers, but I also run I recently established the Africa Brand Summit, because, Africa is one continental brand that is also being affected by all sorts of things that we see in South Africa. Look at Zimbabwe.
Right.
Look,
absolutely.
we can go on forever. So I ran two companies, the Africa Brand Summit and the Don Valley Reputation Managers.
So obviously you're someone who speaks out very volubly on social media, which I appreciate. I love when people are unafraid, and despite the countervailing winds of cancel culture, there are lots of us who are going to say what we're going to say, and they've got no hope of shutting us down. And that's certainly the impression I get from you. Are you at all involved in this? Because there are all kinds of NGOs and loose associations on social media. I saw that you were talking on some webinar or as part of a confederation of people, that 1 million South Africans.
Move 1 million.
What's that all about? Can you give us some insight?
Well, it's a group of South Africans in South Africa and in the diaspora who decided to speak out, so I support them. I support all South African initiatives by citizens, by civil society, to say we have to take our country back. We should never get to a point where we become so afraid of politicians that they can just ride roughshod over us. And this is what's happening in countries like Zimbabwe, Russia, China, where people are so afraid of politicians. We should never allow that to happen in South Africa. So I support this movement, because there are South Africans who are saying enough is enough. We have to speak back. These guys have to remember that we didn't bring them into power so that they can be our bosses, our rulers. They're not our rulers. They are governors. We appoint them, and we should be able to tell them to get off.
Solly, you were on my TV show a while ago, and you had some terrific arguments with Hlanganisi, who's also been on the show before, this one and that one. It seems to me, politically, would you describe yourself as something of a libertarian?
I don't use titles. I don't know what that means.
Okay, well, if someone
I hate boxes. I hate boxes, because then you put the title here and say, okay, so that you go into that pigeonhole. I'm a South African who believes. I read the preamble to our constitution often, and it reminds me of the country that we wanted to build at the dawn of our democracy. And that country is not a country for blacks or for colors or for whites, for Indians. It's a country for all of us. We're supposed to have learned what racial discrimination can do to a country in the past, and we should never repeat that. So I'm for a country that must build for all South Africans. Maybe you could put me somewhere in the center. Maybe I don't know, center left.
Okay.
Definitely not extreme left.
Yeah, but if you like these, if you don't like these labels, then what do you think of this trend towards? It's not just in South Africa, but even in countries like the United States, this trend towards identity politics, where actually your politics is entirely defined by your skin color, your gender, your access to resources,
right,
whether you come from a family with privilege or money. How do you feel about all of that?
Well, it's unfortunate. I think we live in a world that's increasingly mixed, diverse, and we cannot afford, we don't have a choice, whether it's in South Africa, in America, in other parts of the world. We do not have a choice but to build a world where everybody can feel their home. I'm saying, so the minute you go into start building a world for Muslims, for blacks, for whites, for Indians, it's not going to win. There's going to be conflict at some point, because but the minute you do that, you're excluding others. When you say this is for whites only, you're excluding everyone who's not white. When you say it's for blacks, same thing. Colors. So we don't have a choice. We need to learn. We can't keep feeding the endless cycle of viciousness against one another that's been going on through human history. At some point, we need to say, let's do something different. Okay, let's flock this thing differently and hope for different outcomes.
It's interesting. So many people in the world are still talking about things like systemic racism, systemic discrimination. To me, and correct me if you think I'm wrong on this, a systemic problem means that there are laws or there are people in the system who are treating some better than others.
Correct.
So in South Africa, we certainly don't have laws that discriminate. If at all, we have laws that discriminate in favor of black people, not against them. Because things like affirmative action perhaps could be interpreted certainly as giving an advantage, and that's for various reasons, whether you agree or disagree. Maybe some people think it's a good thing, some people think it's a bad thing, but there are no laws that actively discriminate against people on the basis of race or gender or religion or culture, because if they did, they would be unconstitutional. So when we talk about systemic discrimination or systemic inequalities and all of that kind of thing, we have to identify exactly what the cause of that is, because otherwise politicians are just finding ways to separate us rather than talking about things they can actually change. And if there's a person who's racist, or there's a person who's a sexist, or there's a person who's discriminating, then we can take that person to task individually, and there are means to do this in society. So do you think that there's this paranoia about systemic racism which is justified or unjustified?
Well, I think the language that we use in our body politics in South Africa makes some South Africans feel they don't belong. And I think we have to be mindful of that. I mean, we're talking about things being constitutional. Apartheid was constitutional, but we had to challenge it. BEE laws were correct when they were first introduced. But I think that what we didn't do, what we should have done, was to say every 10 years or 15 years, we're going to stop, look at what has been achieved, what needs to be adjusted, and all. They can't run forever. I'm sorry. A white child who was born in South Africa, a white family who's not rich, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, it means that child is going to be excluded simply because they're white. It cannot be right. Okay? Yeah. And Patrice Motsepe can still go into a big deal with Sanlam and call it a BEE deal. I mean, I'm sorry, that's nonsense. This dude is empowered over and over again. What else must happen for him to be empowered more? What about other people? So we need to get to a point where we say, this is a child of South Africa, irrespective of their skin color. They have potential. They can become something big. Let's invest in them. Let's not look at the skin color. But we're not that. If you face with a white child and a black child, you're going to say, no, the black child must get it. For how long? You can't say, let's deal with the black issue first, because it can go on forever and forever and forever. So we need to get to a point where we say, at what point do we say, let's discuss sunset clauses. Let's say, look at Elon Musk. Let's look at all these white South Africans or others, colors, blacks who leave the country and succeed elsewhere, and we start wanting to claim them as ours, but we didn't invest in them. Actually, we discourage them, we encourage them to leave, or we discourage them from staying while they were here. So I think that the kind of country we should build is one where the language is embracing. The language is...
there are people who would say, Sully, why are you so worried about these people? If they don't want to be part of the country, let them leave. And frankly, the ones who are being so obstreperous, let's chase them into the sea, and let's have a South Africa where we don't have to worry about these divisions. What do you say to those people?
No, you know what? I think it's too. We mustn't simplify things that are complex. Okay, I always say that in all groups there are angels and there are schmucks. Okay, we need to look at individuals.
Yeah.
In my view, there are white people who are good for South Africa and others who are bad for South Africa. There are black people who are good for South Africa and others who are bad for South Africa. Indians, color. So I prefer to look at individuals and say, this dudette is awesome for this country. How do we make sure that we give them the space to make us proud? If we did that, we have something in South Africa that many countries in Africa don't have. We have this diversity. And I don't care who says what. Diversity, a diverse team are rich teams because we have perspectives, views from different, people. If you have the same culture, the same group of people, inbreeding of ideas happens, and then you don't grow. I'm saying, so we have this diversity that's underutilized in South Africa. That's bad.
So Sally Moeng is here. It's the Burning Platform. Hopefully you know a little bit about the way he feels, about where we're at as a country, but there is news, and I think we must turn our attention now to some of the events in current affairs, which I'd like to have your opinion on. So Sally, let's start with the ANC's NEC meeting, because apparently this was a very big deal, and we all should have been paying attention to it. The ANC has these NEC meetings regularly, but this was an important one that they needed to discuss corruption in. They've never discussed corruption before. Do you think this time things will actually change within the party because the president? Well, don't jump to the obvious conclusion here. Come on, be as nice as you can, Sally.
Look, the ANC has been in power for 26 years, okay? They've been in power for 26 years. They've known how to play us, okay? I'm not saying nothing will happen, but for me, it hasn't happened until it happens. Let me ask you, what did Julius Caesar say? Did you read Julius Caesar, Shakespeare's Julius Caesar?
Yes.
When he was walking up the stairs to the Capitol on the Ides of March, he turned around and he saw the soothsayer, the same dude who said to him, "Beware the Ides of March." What did Julius Caesar say to him on that day?
I can't remember.
He said, the Ides of March are arrived. And the soothsayer looked at him and said, "Yeah, see, but
they're not
gone.
over." Yeah,
they are not over. So Ramaphosa, the thing with Ramaphosa, with due respect, Ramaphosa can make a very perfect scammer. You know, scammers, those Nigerian dudes.
Yeah.
They speak well, they speak good language. You can trust them. You want to embrace them and bring them into your home. And the next thing, all your money is gone. So he's a nice guy. You want to hug him. He's like, there's no way that this guy could be lying to me. He's that kind of guy. But I want to see action. And we must be very careful in South Africa. We must not be trapped into the politics of the African National Congress, okay? There's the ANC and the South Africa. I think South Africa. I don't think ANC. ANC so-called Integrity Commission, look at who sits on that commission. Let me tell you, I used to be a card-carrying member of the African National Congress. ANC people and people who grew up in the ANC, their first allegiance is to the ANC. You heard what the lady in Durban said, like that there's no South Africa without the ANC. She's not the only one to think that way. So the first thing they want to do is save the ANC, and then South Africa will come first. I don't want to fall into that trap. So those Integrity Commission people, all this in there, their role is to make sure the ANC is not embarrassed.
You're talking about Zandile Gumede, but she was sworn out of office this week. Do you think that that's purely symbolic?
Yeah, she was sworn out of. Oh, yeah, but look, what happened at NEC last week was that the ball was thrown into the NPA's court. So Shamila Batohi, I'm waiting to see which way she's going to jump. I don't trust the Integrity Committee. I don't trust ANC processes. ANC processes are for the party. We don't live in a country that belongs to the ANC. We live in a country in a constitutional democracy. So I want to see these Chapter 9 institutions and the law enforcement bodies, the criminal justice system doing what it must. So in other words, and there's a very bit important technicality in what Ramaphosa said last week. He said those who are charged must step aside. He didn't say those who are implicated or those who are suspected of, you must be charged. And who charges? It's not the Integrity Commission that charges. It's the NPA that must charge. The Hawks must do their work, prepare the dockets, and Chamila Batohi must finally, hopefully, one day get to a point where it says, okay, we have enough information to go after someone like Asa Makashule. Until the NPA acts, all these people will continue saying, well, I've not been charged. Someone like Asa Makashule, I've not been charged.
What do you think of this? There was a really interesting suggestion made by Professor Farah at, I think, Rhodes. He said, we should declare an amnesty, but where we tell people these are the conditions. So number one, you go to your lawyer and you acknowledge everything. You own up to all the things you've done. You put it all out there. It's like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You have to be perfectly honest, And if you put it all out there and you start making arrangements to pay back that money, including the salary that you earned while you were being corrupt, you don't have to go to jail. If you don't do that, we will investigate thoroughly and you will face the full might of the law. We've got so much corruption in this country, and to the tune of so many millions and millions of rands, that it doesn't seem like our courts could handle a sudden influx of cases of fraud and corruption. We would be busy for decades, and it would cost huge amounts of money, and the only people who'd profit from it would be the lawyers. Is there a way to find some middle ground where we give people an amnesty if they own up and where they pay back, so we can start these wheels turning, and we can allow people to cleanse their souls and to come out and be reborn as good people instead of having to go to jail as bad ones? Do you think there's any merit in that system? My
dear Gareth, if you walk into a Pick and Pay or a Woolies tomorrow or today, this morning, and you pick up something, you put it in your pocket, and they see you, there won't be any amnesty discussion for you. You're going to go to jail. Okay. Yeah. Now, why must we live in an animal farm in South Africa? Why must there be rules for some and not for the others? I don't buy this amnesty nonsense. I'm sorry. There's got to be consequences, because if there are no consequences, other people are going to see what to do it again in the future. They're going to do. Why not? It's been done in the past. It can happen again. No, people must go to jail. All these guys, I don't care how long it takes. We must invest in a system that says there are consequences. The laws are for everybody. We don't have a system of laws for ANC politicians. It's nonsense. And all these fancy professors who come up with these, forgive them, let them pay. They're not going to pay. Some of that money is gone. And anyway, no amnesty. There's got to be consequences. In a system where there are no consequences, others keep doing the same thing again.
Okay. So that's a no-go for you.
No, definitely not.
How does it work that we are paying money to people who are suspended, people who are acting in positions? I mean, there's famously been people like Ria Piecha when she was chief of police. We paid for her for like 3 years to sit at home. Is there a way we could also, I mean, I know this sounds like I'm giving up, but we are at a point in South Africa where we have to look at all the available potential solutions, even if they grate us morally, like this amnesty one clearly bothers you. How about this? What if we say, all right, if you are a politically compromised person, we will allow you to keep X percentage of the money that you've stolen. And from now on, all deals with government will involve a commission of, let's say, 10, maybe even 20%, so that there's enough of a cushion for these people who just cannot help themselves and are greedy. And it'll all make sense. But this is the maximum amount, like 20%, let's say, is the absolute ceiling. And the other 80% must be spent on the things that government is there to spend it on: social welfare, roads, water, electricity, infrastructure, education, health, all of the things that we absolutely need as a country. If you touch that 80%, it's like the Terminator. He comes in and he just blows you away. And that's it. You get to keep absolutely nothing, including your job or your dignity. Right. Is there some way we could figure a corruption charge into everything that we do, so that we could just make it above board and everybody knows, okay, that's just to keep feathering the nest. That's to make sure that we grease the palms, but it's part of the deal.
Okay, Gareth, I'm at a point where I think you and I are having these discussions, and there are many other South Africans with awesome ideas of what could work differently for South Africa. But whether we like it or not, in the end, none of these will be implemented if the ANC is not for them. So let's go back to systemic issues. Okay.
I promise you, I know it sounds like I'm grasping at straws here, but this is actually something that came up in conversation with friends of mine the other day. Right. They said, well, if we just acknowledge corruption as a reality and we attach a fee to transactions, couldn't that just make things a little bit more easy to do?
I speak French. I don't know if you speak French. In French, there's an expression. It says, avec des si, on peut mettre Paris dans une bouteille. It means with si, if you can do anything, you can imagine it, you can put Paris in a bottle.
In a bottle, yeah.
If you're looking for sustainable long-term solutions for South Africa, there's got to be political change. Okay, either the ANC loses massive power, and don't tell me it won't happen. It can happen. look at 2016. That's why the ANC is afraid of 2021, because it saw that the 2016 could happen and at a bigger scale. We have to either remove the ANC from power or reduce its power massively so that it works with other people. Because the only way to change the way we do things, including what you've just said, Gareth, is to make sure that the people who make policies and who implement those things listen to us, the South Africans. The ANC doesn't care about listening to us. It gives us the middle finger all the time. So we can make all these lofty proposals and put them in newspapers, in articles. As long as the ANC continues power, they can keep showing us the middle finger.
All right, so the ANC is the rotten thing, but what are the other parties like, in your opinion? Because we don't have a lot of options there. You know, the EFF has got some crazy socialist ideas. Correct. The DA, just yesterday, this John Moody thing, I didn't know who John Moody was until yesterday, I must be honest with you. But clearly this is, according to the media, and I'm very suspicious of our local media, but according to the media, John Moody leaving the DA is a very big deal. They are also in disarray. So who could be trusted with taking South Africa forward? It doesn't seem the parties have answers.
Well, the parties that exist now that are represented in parliament are just happy to earn their salaries and go home and go there, look clever or fall asleep or play on their phones. And I've been in the National Assembly, by the way. I've seen people just playing on their phones, you know. So what? Yeah. The reason I support movements like the one you mentioned, like the Move 1 Million and others, not just that one, there's SA First and others. I think South Africans need to form something else. So I don't believe that existing parties, I don't believe the EFF is not for the South Africa we should build anyway. They're racist, whether they admit it or not, they are. The DA has got all this race shower hovering above their head. If each time a black person leaves the DA, they claim racism. We don't know that. I mean, I could join the DA and leave for all sorts of other reasons and say, yeah, because it's racist. We don't know that. But that's the DA's problem. What South Africa needs is a new party in the middle, in the center of our political sphere, and a uniting party of white, blacks, Indian. We can do it. I believe entirely that it can happen.
All right.
And I hope it happens before the next elections.
What do you think of Herman Mashaba and what he's trying to do?
Well, I'm keeping my eye on Herman Mashaba. I think he's going in the right direction. I hope that he gets the support that he needs. And I liked a lot of the things that he says. So I hope that, you know, he manages to sustain the journey, because the journey to the next elections will require a lot of funding, a lot of consistency, and I hope that he surrounds himself with the right people to get there. But I think we should encourage him to keep going. He seems to be, his heart is in the right place.
All right. Are you at all impressed by the Zondo Commission and what's going on over there? Because they are uncovering all kinds of interesting stuff. And obviously it hasn't led to any prosecutions yet, but they keep assuring us that something will happen. Are you completely unmoved by the Zondo Commission?
No, the Zondo Commission is like a soap opera. It's like Generations. They could have given that money. Seriously, they could have given that money to some of these guys who write, soapies, and we sit there, we get entertained. Listen, the truth of the matter is that at the end of this soap opera, okay, they're going to write a fancy report with a nice cover. Now they're at 700 million rands plus, all right? And the report is going to go to whoever is president. Maybe Ramaphosa will still be president. We don't know what's going on in the ANC, but whoever is going to be president will get a report with recommendations. And that report will not just be made public immediately. They're going to be discussed in the NEC. Guess who sits in the NEC? All these people who should be in overalls, okay?
Yeah,
those guys are going to decide, okay, we're going to sit on it for a year or for 2 years, or wait for the next elections. Don't release it immediately. So spend so much time on it, or no, don't implement. So there's nothing that's going to come out of there will be an obligation to the president to implement. You know what I'm saying? So what should have happened with that money? And we keep hearing Batohi saying she doesn't have the resources she needs to do what she must. They should have given that money to empower the National Prosecutions Authority, because those guys then will go in there, investigate crime and prosecute crime. The Zondo Commission is just a soap opera. It gives us the impression something is happening. Nothing is happening. It's frustrating.
Solly Moeng is our guest on the Burning Platform this morning, and exactly on time, here is Kanthan Pillay, who's just done fatherly duties by dropping the kids off at school. First of all, do they have to wear masks and sanitize and take temperatures and all that stuff, Kanthan?
Well, in fact, they have to do absolutely that. So Mia's going into class in 15 minutes time. She is sitting right next to me right now. And she has a mask on standby, and she will sanitize and go into the classroom.
All right. So Solly's our guest this morning with you, Captain.
I've been listening with great interest while I've been driving here to school. Morning, Solly. How are you doing?
Hi, very good.
So, Canthan, I don't know if you've got any comments on some of the things we've already covered, but that ANC NEC meeting and the ongoing factionalism inside the ANC, which the president seems to be managing, even if he's not managing it well, he's still there. And there were talks of him being unseated. There were talks of Tito Mboweni resigning. There were, we always hear these rumors about how deadly these NEC meetings can be for some people, but turns out that not much changes. Nothing's going to change because they're people with their noses in the trough.
My theory in terms of people who leak information from meetings is that they're trying to set the agenda in terms of what people end up discussing about it. So I generally refuse to believe any information that comes out from these anonymous sources sitting within these meetings. Look, as far as I'm concerned, the sooner our president actually falls and the ANC actually implodes, the better it is for the country. Really? I think this entire idea that the ANC is capable of self-correcting and getting itself and thereafter the country on a path where we can actually take our place in the family of nations. No, that's pie in the sky stuff. It's never going to happen.
So you would actually hasten the day.
I would hasten the day, absolutely. Solly's point is exactly right. Ramaphosa is just so affable. He speaks so well, but he's just flipping useless.
Sure. Where do we even take it from here?
Look,
what do you make of all the fuss that the media is making about this John Moody character, the Gauteng leader of the Democratic Alliance? He believes there will be more resignations from black leaders in the party. Obviously, this brings up old ghosts for the DA, which they don't like to acknowledge or admit to. It makes it look like it's a white party, that people like John Moody are the progressives, that they're leaving, that it's heading to the right side of the spectrum instead of staying a center party. What do you make of this? Did John Moody even feature in your nightmares or dreams before today?
I sit back and ask myself at what point has John Moody actually contributed anything to the national discourse that's been of substance? I mean, he's a career politician, isn't he?
Sure, of course, yeah.
And I've tried very hard to come across with a kind of kernel of wisdom that I can say this is something that John Moody stands for. I'm happy to be corrected here, but Gareth, maybe you can remind me of something that he said that is, relatively significant.
No, he did say this upon leaving. I believe that there will be more leaders, more so-called black leaders, who will be leaving the DA because, just like me, they feel that this is no longer a political home for them.
And I don't have a problem with that whatsoever. I think it's necessary for the DA to implode as well. Let's be very clear about this. We need to have parties that actually stand for something, and not people who are kind of trying to gravitate around this false idea of unity in the nation's interest. We need parties of principle.
But we see this word unity being bandied about, and it seems to get more credence than it deserves. Like, unity, when you're trying to be everything to everybody, means you're nothing.
Absolutely correct. And right now, if you look in terms of parties that actually stand for anything in this country, we've literally only got two parties that stand for something. That's the EFF and the Freedom Front Plus.
And both of those are the only parties that seem to be growing at the moment.
Absolutely correct. And, there's a lesson out there. The DA, at the point at which they decided that they were going to toss principle out of the window in the name of inclusivity, that was the point at which the party actually tanked spectacularly.
Sure. What about NGOs? I mean, both of you have been involved with a number of NGOs. There are lots of people who are trying to do good work in South Africa. In fact, you could argue that the NGOs during lockdown stood up for the people of this country more than any political party did. And there are still some of them that are trying to do good work, and some of them succeed, occasionally have to go to court to make successes happen. We see more and more the CDC's results coming out this week that they actually had to admit that only 6% of the total deaths in the United States were exclusively from the coronavirus. And governments suddenly starting to backpedal and try to justify their decisions. We knew this was going to happen. I know that the two of you are more or less on my side here when it comes to lockdowns having been very draconian, something that we didn't need necessarily at the level that government tried to impose them on us. Some of these laws were stupid. We've been over that territory. But now you see Zweli Mkhize saying in Parliament yesterday, oh, we're over the worst. Now we can start rolling back into normality and we can start opening up the economy. And government did the right thing by locking down. We saved lives. The evidence is still out on that, right?
Yes, the evidence is still out on that. And I think we will probably only find real data probably in a couple of years from now. Because remember that most of the information that's been collated in these various places has not been digitally captured at any level. So even though the companies are going through a process of very meticulously documenting all of the COVID-related stuff, my daughter's school, where I am at right now, every day they're going through this process of taking temperatures, documenting who's coming and who's going. They want to put in place geolocation of people, but there is no central authority that's actually able to collate all of this stuff and sift through the data and say, here's what's actually happening. And I don't think that we actually ever going to have this government turning around, taking all of that information that has been put down on paper, ingesting it into a database, and then going through actually crunching numbers and giving us a sense of what has actually gone down. So like I said, probably about 2 years' time, if we are lucky, we'll get a sense. And of course, by that time,
will we learn? Sully, do you think we'll learn from this? Do you think that governments all over the world will be forced to be accountable eventually, even if it does take 2 to 3 years, as Canton says? Do you think these governments will be held accountable for their decisions, and that if they don't make better decisions in future, that we can throw them out of helicopters or something similar so that they'll take these responsibilities a little more seriously?
Look, there are two things. One, there are two things. There's the matter of the draconian restrictions and how some of them didn't make sense. They didn't seem to be aimed at helping us, avoid this pandemic. But there's also the matter of corruption. I hope that we learn in the future. South Africa is a very complex country. We're not Spain or Italy or France.
Sure.
With all the diversity of, the residential areas and all that. I think we'll look back hopefully one day and say maybe we could have done it differently. But what I hope will happen is that all the corruption that happened, the PPE corruption, I also want those people to find themselves in red overalls in the courts. They must explain themselves in the future. But in terms of the pandemic, how we responded to it, look, this is a global pandemic. And everybody suddenly found themselves faced with this thing, and having to decide what's the best way to protect the population. I want to believe that in the beginning, the government was really doing. It came from the right place. They wanted to protect us, but they went overboard.
Explain that to somebody whose business has gone under, whose employees are now destitute, someone whose life has been turned upside down. That person is going to be hungry for some kind of justice.
You're right. No, I don't want to make excuses here for. Look, my views about the stupidity of many of the regulations, including the alcohol ban, the cigarette ban. I don't smoke. Everybody says that like I'm not a racist, okay?
I know.
but it was wrong. It didn't make sense. I mean, there are certain things that could have been customized to different sectors, for instance, to allow business to happen. So at some point, when this thing hit us as a medical problem, and at some point it became clear it was also becoming an economic, financial problem, the government should have stopped and said, okay, how do we manage the two in tandem? But they didn't do that. And actually, they didn't even seem to care. There was no heart. When you listen to some of the pronouncements by the politicians, it was like they don't give a damn what happens to the tourism guys, what happens to the general hospitality guys. They didn't really give it. And that's the problem. People who've never run businesses still think that those who run businesses must just find money somewhere and keep paying people. You know what I'm saying? And so I hope there will be consequences for decisions that were deliberate that shouldn't have been.
Canton, do you think going further afield, and someone asked me to get your comments on this. There was another clash between the Chinese and the Indian on that border.
Yes.
And the tensions there are they're bubbling. It's not sort of, you can't say it's been ratcheted up, but certainly they're not the best of friends at the moment. One of our listeners sent me a message to say, can Kanthan just update us on his thoughts around China and India?
It's really difficult to get a sense of whose propaganda is more accurate than the other, and that's always the issue with these small territorial disputes that eventually end up making no sense whatsoever. It's kind of like the disputes around the Chobe Islands. You're familiar with the Chobe Islands?
In the Okavango?
Yes. Well, it's basically an island that's submerged for half the year, and there's been an ongoing dispute between Namibia and Botswana in terms of who actually owns it.
Right.
And in fact, what we have in terms of the line of control that we have right now on the border between India and China. Remember what happened was that in the 60s, when India was occupied with Pakistan, China seized the opportunity and basically invaded India and captured a significant chunk of Indian territory. And that is the line of control that China holds to this day. So, for example, Mount Kailas, which is probably the most sacred mountain to Hindu mythology, is now part of Chinese territory de facto because they captured it in the 60s and have basically held to that ever since. And the British were very happy with that scenario because it meant that the former colonized were fighting among themselves, and they were free to actually get out of there. I wouldn't read too much into what's going on there on that particular border. The issue in terms of how it will play itself out is if China pushes too strongly to try and actually extend its territorial gains there. And understand why China is doing this. It's not that they're fumbling for this. They want to build a link between China and Pakistan.
Correct.
And the efficient way to be able to do that, obviously you can't run it over the mountaintops. And you have to be able to run it where the land is relatively flat, which means basically an incursion into Indian territory. But the likely outcome that will come from that, and this is just to cheer everyone up, is that India won't take on China; they'll just take on Pakistan, and I think that they'll pretty much obliterate them because, in terms of the comparison in terms of sizes of defense forces, but of course they are both nuclear powers. So again,
we don't need that war.
Yes, but I think when you have mutually assured destruction in terms of nukes, then
it tends to calm everybody.
That tends to calm. So I hope that's answered the question, but I wouldn't panic too much about that right now.
Solly,
but I'd just like to touch back on something that you were talking about just now, Gareth, which is, are we going to end up in a situation where we are better off at the end of this process? Are there lessons going to be learned? The thing that has been an eye-opener for me is the way in which the courts
Kanthan, you froze up there. Sorry. You have to repeat yourself. I'm going to let Kanthan go and get him back, Sia, because I do want to hear his point that he was going to make about the courts. But Solly, if I can come back to you while we're waiting for Kanthan to come. American politics. I know you pay attention because we all do. When America catches a cold, we all sneeze, et cetera, et cetera. But they're building up to an election, and it's impossible. You'd have to be some kind of a fool to think that America doesn't affect everything in the world, and that when they're having an election, that politics there becomes politics everywhere else too. What are your feelings on what's going on at the moment? We've got these riots in Democrat-controlled cities. We were told for the longest time that these were peaceful protests. There was nothing wrong by the media. But as soon as the polls started to show that it was having a negative effect on the Biden campaign, and that people were upset about their neighborhoods being torched and their businesses being destroyed, then suddenly the media said, oh, but it's Trump's fault. So the non-existent riots that they've been telling us didn't exist for a long time are now suddenly Trump's fault. It seems to me the Democrats have this amazing ability to never be held responsible for any of the things their supporters do.
Look, I think it's a very murky political environment that's happening in the U.S. And we've also had reports that some of these, peacefully organized marches or protests end up being infiltrated by other people. We don't know that, but there's also the narrative that some people going in there to create chaos, and obviously the chaos gets blamed on the organizers of the marches. So it's really hard, but it's very hard for me to comment on who's right, who's wrong. But I should say, to the point that you started with, that America needs a president who understands that it's not just about America. Whether we like it or not, America has a big role to play in global affairs. And when you have a president like Trump, unfortunately, who's so inward looking, and ignores the role that America could play in, and it hasn't been a heavenly role all the time. I'm not. Don't get me wrong,
but
it does have a role to play. And someone like Barack Obama and Clinton, with all their faults, had the emotional intelligence to understand that America has a role to play, and other people out there look at what we do, how we do it. And Trump doesn't care about that. I think it's unfortunate.
So, but that's obviously Trump. That's an effect of his personality. Do you think that he would be worse than? Do you think 4 more years of Trump would be worse than 4 more years of Biden?
I think Biden would be a better person for America, for America in the world. Maybe Trump. They keep saying Trump is good for America, but as I said, America cannot afford to just look inward. And Biden will, given his past, he's interested as well in the role that America plays in global affairs. And in my view, America needs a president who's global, not just parochial.
Okay. Kanthan, I just want to pick up with you because you've just rejoined the conversation. You were saying something about the courts, and then you've got a response to Sully.
Yes. Now, I was quite taken aback at the fact that the courts were actually reluctant to engage strongly with the multitude of court cases that were brought challenging the regulations. And the courts basically played a very political line on it, in the sense that they kept deferring the decision-making process, they kept deferring court dates. And I think really what this was telling us is that there are some matters on which the courts will definitely end up drawing a line in the sand, but by and large, they will buy into the entire notion of the National Democratic Revolution. And I think this is going to be the case on an ongoing basis, particularly as the ANC still ultimately is the gatekeeper in terms of who gets appointed to the judiciary. And,
so let's turn our attention quickly, because I'm aware of the time, to Sully's response to my question about American politics, and I was talking about the internal, but Sully wants to talk more about the outward looking kind of president that we have.
I think I just have one quick answer to that, Sully. If you look in terms of what Donald Trump has achieved over the past week in terms of peace in the Middle East, no American president has been able to pull that off in history. So you're talking inward looking versus outward looking.
And let's just remember that Biden was part of an administration that let ISIS run amok, that started a war in Libya, that screwed up Syria, that gave Iran money and nuclear weapons. I mean, these are things that for a supposedly emotionally intelligent presidency, Trump has started no wars, 0 wars. Don't you think that's worth a little bit of credit?
Well, from my side, yes. But
anyway, I mean, Joe Biden's been in politics for 50 years. You know that? He's celebrated 50 years in politics. And here he is running for president again. Are you concerned about his mental health? Because he made a speech in Philadelphia this week, it was in Philadelphia, which was pretty good in terms of the fact that he could stand up and he could look at the camera for most of the time. But these are small mercies when someone spills out a sentence that makes absolutely no sense, as he did about 100 years of coronavirus, or like the deaths are not that bad in this year, but for 100 years they've been terrible. He made 0 sense. Are we concerned about his mental health?
Well, I think that I'm far more concerned about the fact that he might die in office and Kamala
Kamala
Harris
Harris would
then
take over.
becomes president, which I think would be an absolute bloody disaster in terms of the US. Look, I think to a large extent one can say that he kind of fumbles his words, but does that mean that his policy framework is necessarily flawed? No, I don't think so. I think that as long as the policy framework is actually in place and he's got sufficient handlers to continue advising him as to what he needs to be doing, then the country will pretty much run itself. Look, the thing about America that
so stay on
forget,
teleprompter. Stay on teleprompter then, Joe.
exactly, stay on teleprompter. The thing about America that people fail to take into account is that it really is the most resilient democracy on the face of the planet, if you think about it, because the checks and balances that actually exist within that country are superb. It's the reason why, I mean, you've got an incredibly strong judiciary. You have the separation of powers between each of the states and the federal government. You have power devolving down to the level of cities to an extent that you see in very few parts of the world. And all of those things actually mean that irrespective of who is the person who is sitting at the top, apart from the very broad brushstrokes in terms of international relations, the country pretty much runs in exactly the same way.
All right, but let's talk about the country. And my question that I put to Sully while we were waiting for you to come back, and neither of you have answered this one yet. There are internal ructions going on. There are a lot of these cities that are in deep disarray at the moment. They've pretty much turned lawless for, I think it's close to 90 days. Portland, Chicago, Baltimore, Seattle have been lawless zones. Some of them have even declared themselves autonomous states for a period. It seems that none of these, including Mayor Ted Wheeler of Portland, who's actually had to move out of his flat because they were threatening to burn down the building. These people in these cities that you say have devolved their authority down to mayors and to city councils, they don't seem to be able to gain control of what has become a bit of a national movement in democratic cities. What do you think of that, and where do you think it's going?
Yes, but this is, again, it swings and roundabouts. And now I remember when I first went to the US in '86, and at that time, David Dinkins was mayor of New York City, a Democrat-run city at the time. And I remember Times Square was a shithole of note. 42nd Street was filled with basically drug dealers and pornographic movie theaters. And I just as a point of principle, while I was at
muggers and panhandlers,
yes, well, I made a point of taking my wallet out of my pocket because I was told that it was one of the most dangerous things to be doing. And then Rudy Giuliani came along, and for the next period, he pretty much had this broken window policy that said, well, you fix all of the small things whenever they immediately break. And that very quickly turned New York City over the next 5-year period into one of the safest cities in the world. Now you've had a reversal of that because, and that's what people do when things get comfortable, then they start trying to put in place touchy-feely bullshit that then ends up undermining the fabric of society. And guess what? The electorate ends up swinging around. So I think what's going to happen in places like Portland and Seattle and so forth is that you are going to have a turnaround in terms of who's going to end up running the country, those cities, and it'll be fixed and it'll be much better for a while, and then in about 15, 20 years time, it'll go the other way again. And
Sully, your comments?
Great.
I don't know. It's too internal American for me. Look, right. My view on the whole in terms of America remains that America needs a leader that is globally intelligent, right? And I do not believe that Trump is globally intelligent. Internal ructions and who's running which way, I don't. Look, Trump. You mentioned the fear that Biden might die in office. But the age difference between Biden and Trump is very little. If Biden might die in office, Trump might also die in office. And what's the age difference? 2 years, 3 years between the two of them? And I'm saying, I think, and I don't think that the step that Trump took by moving the American embassy to Jerusalem was the right move. It was emotionally unintelligent for him to do that. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think that this man really understands that the world is almost like a chessboard. You need to be careful how you move your pieces. You need a president. Nobody's going to get it perfectly, but you need a president who has a sense of how to move those pieces without taking into account the interests of everybody. It's not always easy. I don't know. Trump has not convinced me to be the right person. I mean, you're saying he hasn't started any wars, but is that the only thing that you think gives him the qualification to continue as president?
Well, Canton, you want to answer? You brought up the Middle East.
Yeah.
Okay.
My quick response is, Sully, I think to a large extent we've been kind of hamstrung by this idea of the chessboard for the longest time. That there is this delicate balance, and we have to worry about sensitivities between nations. And I think that Trump has been more of an Alexander in this case. He's come along and he said, this is a Gordian knot, and he has sliced through it. And he sliced through it at the level where, for the first time, he's actually exposed some of the major issues that are confronting us as a planet right now. And the single biggest example that I think where he has upended everything for the better has been the question of China. And if you look in terms of what has happened in terms of China, we have been victims of China, we as in South Africans, in exactly the same way that America has been, because we have outsourced our manufacturing capacity to slave labor in China. So over the past 25 years, whatever manufacturing capacity we had built up, and I've often spoken about the fact that our textile industry used to employ, just in Durban, in one street, between Gale Street and Bilo Road, they used to employ 60,000 workers. And there's only one clothing factory left there now, which employs about 400 people. And the reason for that is because we have good labor laws in our country. We have minimum wage structures, but China doesn't have those. And so there is no way that people in this country who are earning the equivalent of $2 an hour can end up competing with people in China who are earning $2 a day.
You're right. Look, the ANC is on the other extreme. Our government is in terms of investing in South Africa, putting South Africa first. But you don't have to go to all the extreme. But the ANC has gone to all that extreme in terms of empowering China. We fear China. We are at the beck and call of China. And I always say to people, the Dalai Lama lives in India. Have you ever had China threaten not to do business with India? Never. So when Mandela was asked by the Chinese not to host the Dalai Lama in South Africa, he said, no, get out of here. And he hosted him. Nothing happened. But everyone who came after Mandela was allowed themselves to be threatened by China in that regard. And the things, when you don't understand your own worth, the South African leadership doesn't understand South Africa's worth, and that is the problem. So they've given too much to China, and maybe the possibility that the Chinese Communist Party also finances the ANC. I don't know how true that is, but I hear that's the truth. It's happening, and if it's happening, then it's a big problem. It's a bigger problem than actually we see.
Well, I'm gonna have to draw this to a close. Final comments, Canton, and then final comments, Sully, and then we've got to get out of here, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Look, I think the final comments from my side, I think that by and large, the ANC is going to see a significant loss in terms of support come next election. I do think that the time has come for the ANC to actually fragment. And I think that that's for the good of the country. So between now and the next elections is really the point at which we need to be consolidating around points of principle. And if we can get to that stage, then we'll have our country back again. Well, that's my hope in any case. And I think this is something Sully and I can agree on.
All right, very good. Sully, last things you want to say?
Yeah, look, I don't believe that the solutions that South Africa needs in order to rise again or to heal will come from the ANC. I don't believe that anymore. I think that South Africans need to wake up to that reality, organize themselves, and find a way to take control. And I think that South Africans have it in themselves to do that. They should stop being afraid, and they should stop thinking that this Stockholm syndrome is going to kill us.
Yeah. Well, there we go. Let's get out of it and end the lockdown, for heaven's sake.
This is a point
exercise. So let's end on that note. And gentlemen, thank you very much.